Good evening, everyone. My name is Sean Wilson. I'm the Artistic Director of the Ottawa International Writers Festival. Welcome to our third and final virtual season. Thanks for celebrating poetry with us tonight. We very much look forward to seeing you all in person again soon and want to give a quick shout out to our friends at VerseFest who are back later this month with a fantastic hybrid program of online and in-person poetry. I'm broadcasting from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. We at the festival recognize our obligation as settlers on this land to work to repair the harms perpetrated upon Indigenous communities and acknowledge the ongoing trauma colonialism has inflicted and continues to inflict on First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous peoples. I want to begin, as always, by thanking you all for supporting authors and booksellers through these difficult times. Our official bookseller is Perfect Books on Elgin Street, and I know wherever you are right now, there's an independent bookseller nearby who would be more than happy to sell you some great books like this one. The festival is supported by individuals like you, so I hope you'll consider subscribing to our newsletter and making a donation. We can't do this without you. There's still lots to see this season. Friday's podcast features Danny Ramadan in conversation with Hassan Namir about his new poetry collection, Umbilical Cord. Next week, we're honored to be hosting Drew Hayden Taylor, Norma Dunning, and Daryl J. McLeod for their powerful anthology, Me Tomorrow, Indigenous Views on the Future. And also the launch of Arc Poetry issue 96, featuring Gillian Christmas, Simone Dalton, and Sherry Alexander Hines, hosted by Brandon Wint. Also want to thank the Ottawa Public Library, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, the City of Ottawa, the Ontario Arts Council, the Canada Council for the Arts, Carleton University, and CBC Ottawa for their ongoing support. It's now my great pleasure to introduce series editor Anita Lahey, who will introduce her collaborator, Souvankham Thammavongsa, as well as tonight's poets. Anita Lahey is an author, editor, journalist, and mentor. We were lucky enough to spotlight her humorous and heartbreaking memoir, The Last Goldfish, on our podcast when it came out, and I'm thrilled to welcome her back to our virtual stage. Please give a warm virtual welcome to our host this evening, Anita Lahey.
Thanks so much, Sean. And welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this gathering of Canadian poets and poetry, which we've convened to celebrate the arrival of the 14th annual edition of the Best Canadian Poetry in English, this jam-packed anthology for which I'm privileged to serve as series editor. BCP serves as one of our key literary touchstones, a yearbook for anyone with a stake in Canadian poetry, as well as an open door for newcomers to poetry. Here's how it works. We call on a different guest editor each year to survey the poetic landscape. That means they read, this guest editor, hundreds and hundreds of poems written by Canadians that appeared in that year's journals and magazines, in print and online. They also receive recommendations from our editors at large, who are likewise out there on the hunt for poetic magic. This year, those generous readers were Michael Fraser, Laboni Islam, and Wasayasan Christine Sai. Actually, they have been our editors at large for the past few years now. And then in consultation with myself, each guest editor whittles down, consultation isn't the right word, more like in really vigorous discussion. And we read the poems to each other. The guest editor whittles down their favorites to 50 notable poems that appear in the final book, which is no small task. This year, the brave, discerning person who took on this task, our 2021 guest editor, is the remarkable Souvankham Thammavongsa, whose book of stories, How to Pronounce Knife, was an absolute sensation last year. I mean, it still is an absolute sensation, winning the Scotiabank Giller Prize and the Trillium Book Award, and gaining Souvankham a tremendous amount of well-deserved praise and a growing readership, not just here in Canada, but internationally. The thing is, How to Pronounce Knife is actually Souvankham's 5th book. The first 4 were moving, unforgettable poetry collections. So those of us who like poetry, many of us have been familiar with her work for many years, starting with Small Arguments from 2003, which won the Relit Award, Found from 2007, now a short film, Light from 2013, which won the Trillium Award for Poetry, and Cluster from 2019. More than accolades, these books won Souvankham a devoted readership that tellingly crosses many boundaries in Canadian poetry and literary circles, political, aesthetic, and otherwise. She is a poet for people who love poems, full stop. This evening, you'll hear from 8 talented contributors reading their poems from the anthology aloud, a vibrant and varied sampling of what you'll find between the covers of this book. For me as series editor, this moment every year when the anthology comes to life, when the poems actually speak out loud for the first time. Before the poets step up and begin, Souvankham's here to talk with me about her experience bringing this new edition together. I always feel an immense gratitude to those who accept my invitation to guest edit Best Canadian Poetry. It's a daunting undertaking. So what I really want to know, Souvankham, is why you said yes. I know you had some idea what you were in for, but what really made you want to do this?
I really just wanted to be the editor because you asked. You know, when someone asks you to be in the service of poetry, you take it. I had an amazing year with fiction, but I really missed the things that I learned to do and the things that I read and loved about poetry. And poetry to me is not a stepping stone to fiction. It wasn't something that I wanted to move away from. I wanted to be reminded of how I started, what brought me to the dance in the first place. And the best way to do that was to read the literary magazines that published poetry and to pick out the poems that I loved from those magazines.
So spending all the time you did reading those magazines over the course of a year, what surprised you while you were doing that about what you read or about what you were drawn to or your own reaction to things or any or all of the above?
I noticed that in other countries, when you're a poet, you just have to write one poem and everybody and their pet knows about you. In Canada, you actually have to write something like 4 books, and you actually have to be very good. and that is what was such a lovely surprise reading the literary magazines that published these poems. Everybody was amazing. It was so hard to pick and choose. I was pleasantly surprised by what a wonderful sense of humor we have. And, I grew up reading 15 Canadian poets times 2, where...
Oh, me too. Me too. Yeah. Times 2, that exact one.
And what's lovely about a book like that is the people you are reading are alive. You can leave that book and look up from that page and you might find that person reading right in front of you. And that's something about the anthology that I wanted to bring to everybody.
That's wonderful to hear. And I'm just still thinking about something you said after my first question, that you didn't think of poetry and you don't think of poetry as a stepping stone to fiction. And I'm just so glad to hear you say that, because I don't think of it that way either. and I think a lot of people don't, but somehow the world around us sees it that way, or they seem to, which is, I don't know.
I know that every person who reads poetry or who buys a poetry book, they aren't brought there by an algorithm. They truly have come there on their own.
Yeah.
And that's so lovely to be in the presence of.
It's and it's also pleasantly surprising to hear you say you were surprised, like you loved how the quality of what you were reading in the magazines. Because I'll tell you, over the years of working with many different guest editors on this anthology, that's not often what, after reading through all those magazines, the guest editors come away and say. They come away and say, oh gosh, there's so much out there that's just, I don't know, So Anyway, it's lovely to hear that you were happy in that world, with those poems. Yeah. And I agree with you that there's lots of humor in our poetry, that it's I don't know, I don't know why, but it seems to step up there beyond the earnestness more and more, or I'm just noticing it more. I don't know, but it's wonderful. Now I want to ask you what you most loved throughout this.
Well, I've been a writer in all of these anthologies. I've been in the best Canadian fiction, the best Canadian essays, and the best Canadian poetry. And one of the things that I loved about this anthology is you get to hear from the poets themselves why they wrote, what their poem, or what they think their poem means, or why they wrote it. You don't get to hear that from the fiction anthology or the essay anthology. It's always the case that a poet is always asked to give a little bit more. And one of the things, I didn't get to read what everyone had to say about their poem until it was printed. So when my copy arrived in the mail, I quickly turned to those pages, and I just loved how unguarded everybody was. They told us their secrets. They pulled us up close and told us what makes them cry, what makes them laugh and angry and love, but also what makes them tick. Sometimes they told us they didn't know what they were doing, and they were just trying.
Yeah.
No one was the same. And what was so lovely is that you could see that a poem can come from anyone at any time, and it can be anything, and it could also be nothing at all that inspired them. And that, I felt, was something so moving about the book, besides their beautiful poems.
For those who aren't familiar with the anthology, Souvankham's talking about, at the back of the book, we have a commentary section, and all the poets are asked to just send in, I think our word limit is up to 250 words about their poem, and anything they want to say about it, like why they wrote it, the process of writing it, what started it, or like Souvankham said, what they think it means, and I love this is my favorite part of working on this anthology, because like Souvankham said, there's always these surprises, and you really feel like you're getting to know the people behind the poems in a different way than because the poem is artful, right? It's constructed. It's like a sculpture. And this is like a little peek behind, like into the sculptor's studio, in a way, where all the tools are, and it's a wonderful gift, really, to be able to read those commentaries. So any BCP poets out there from any of the year's anthologies listening to this, thank you for giving us those little stories about your poems, because we love them. And now I think Souvankham would like to share a little bit from her introduction, and then she will introduce our first poet for the evening.
Okay. Thank you, Anita. It's been such a pleasure to work with you in this anthology this year. This book is about what I saw and read and loved and want you to see and read and love. I understand, too, the writers who hoped to see themselves in this anthology but are not here. I have been where your hope is, and I can tell you, keep going. The best Canadian poetry is probably not in these pages, because the poet didn't send it out to a magazine or didn't have time to sit down to write it, because of life. Life takes up time, whole days. Sometimes you have to count bags and bags of cash 5 levels below the ground for a big bank, because it's a job that will get you to the next minute, the next hour, the next year. How to find that poet. To the editors who are looking and reading, I hope in the years to come that you will find that poet, the one life happened to this year. I know the literary magazines and journals are standing by, and to those who are waiting for confidence and courage and advice, well, there's no such thing as confidence. A poet doesn't need courage. You can be scared and write with that fear. And advice, well, stop asking for someone else's advice. Who's to say you don't already know what is brilliant and spectacular? The first poet you will hear from tonight is Cayley. Cayley has published 2 collections of short stories, 2 collections of poetry, and a young adult novel, and written a number of plays which have been performed in Canada, the US, and the UK. She has won the Trillium Book Award and an O. Henry Prize, and has been a finalist for the Governor General's Award for Fiction, the Relit Award for both fiction and poetry, and the K.M. Hunter Award.
I'm going to thank Anita and Souvankham for their words, and also for that beautiful introduction, which I have read, but it is really nice to hear it again. And I will read the commentary on Attention, which is my poem in Best Canadian Poetry. Attention came out of thinking about how the rhythm of household tasks might be related to poetry, to language, and to love as a repetition, a habit grown over time, the way you might exercise a muscle through habitual use. I have a wife and 3 children. Much of our time is taken up by household tasks, which are done and then undone and done again. Loving one another, losing our tempers, finding our way back over the same local ground. This becomes a rhythm we find together, then lose, then find. Domestic life can feel very small and constrained, and sometimes the constraint is the poetry rather than what prevents it. Emily Dickinson is in there too. She's often present for me, though her life was very different from mine. But she knew about turning what is familiar and close at hand into poetry. And that got me to praise the hypothesis that language was sung before it was spoken. Song always feels like a form of praise. Praise is also involved in marriage and in being with children, and how we must praise one another and forget how to, and then remember. So I'm now going to read you Attention. Attention. And if attention is repetition, folding along the crease until the crease finds itself, the act of making, hollowing out the same groove, as in marriage, studying over years the same face, the same permeable body, as in children, their fury, their fraught going forward, thinning out your life like a membrane that will not break. Their lives a repetition that alters in the telling. Your attention is for them, and theirs outstripping you, and stripping you of anything they find useful, yet carrying you with them, a husk pinned to the inside pocket of their lives, as in repeating the action of rising at dawn, as the poet who wrote on the back of recipe cards attended sternly to the rising bread, attended each repeated blade of grass on the same Amherst lawn, for as long as her days repeated themselves, Each day compressed itself into the other. Then I will believe that language was sung first, before speech, that language was song, praise that could not be contained for the world that repeated, that each day continued. Thank you. And I'm now going to, with great pleasure, introduce the next poet, who is Ronna Bloom. Ronna Bloom lives in Toronto. She is the author of 6 poetry collections. Her poems have been translated into Spanish, Bangla, and Chinese, and recorded by the CNIB. Ronna developed the Poet in Residence program at Sinai Health and is Poet in Community to the University of Toronto. Her website is ronnabloom.com. Thank you.
Is it safe? Tell us, they said, no one died or killed or took their life and left it in the basement. Tell us there are no people ghosts or creature ghosts. Tell us, what color is a good color and will it be safe? Will a condo rise above or a sinkhole below? Please tell us, they said, if you will leave the light on when you go, if you'll come back, and what you did here and with whom. And will we be lovely? And will we be lonely? And will we be lucky? How much will it cost? They said. And how loud? For how long? They cried. For how long? So that poem I wrote after, well, actually in late 2019, I moved out of the house I'd lived in for many, many years. And then all these questions of where to live and what was okay were coming at me and towards me and from me. And that combined with the pre-pandemic January of the following year when we started to brace led to the poem, Is It Safe? So that's the story of the poem and the poem itself. And now I would like to introduce the next poet, Ian Keteku. Ian is a Ghanaian-Canadian writer and multimedia artist based out of Toronto. He is the 2010 World Poetry Slam champion and is the author of Black Abacus, published by Write Bloody North in 2019. Keteku teaches in the creative writing program at OCAD University.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks to the editors and thanks to everyone tuning in. So I'm sure a lot of people have had the experience of losing a parent. My father is in his final season of life, it seems. And his last wish is to go back to Ghana, West Africa, where he was born. I have to kind of tussle with this idea of, keeping him here with the great healthcare or taking him home for one final visit. And within that meditation, I wrote this piece called Mango. When the sky softens and the sky is clear, I will carry my father by feather or feet to the ridge where he was born, where his mother still drinks from the fall. He will sit until the swelling softens. He relives his life, a young mango, too frail to feed anything but the ground with its body. I have the pleasure of introducing the next reader, Randy Lundy. Randy Lundy is a Cree, Irish, and Norwegian member of the Barren Lands First Nation. He was born in Thompson, Manitoba, grew up in Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan, and has lived in Treaty 4 territory in Saskatchewan for more than 20 years now. Randy has published 4 books of poetry, most recently Blackbird Song, 2018, and Field Notes for the South with the University of Regina Press, where he is editor for the Oscana Poetry and Poetics series. Please welcome Randy Lundy.
Hello, everyone. I'm assuming you can hear me. Thanks to the editors, of course, as well as all the tech people who are making this happen tonight, and organizers, and to the audience for joining us. I'm going to read an abbreviated version of the commentary I provided for the poem. The poem is called Morning Pages, Morning. So for me, the poem is a kind of collage of memories and stories. And I think the question that I have as a reader, when I read the poem is, how do these various parts fit together? And having a sort of inside vision of the poem, for me, it's kind of straight up autobiography. It kind of details, here are some things I was thinking about one day. And the title comes from something a reader once said about some of my recent work. And that person said that some of the poems read like morning pages, which, as far as I know, is a practice that some people carry, where they simply sit down in the morning and write their thoughts down, just as a way of keeping themselves writing on a regular basis, which is not something I do. So that's where the title of the poem comes from, Morning Pages. And I like this poem simply because I get to say in the poem that I don't give a fuck, and I get to include a chicken joke. So I'll read it to you now. Morning Pages. Rain late last evening near the end of April, and a light freeze overnight. This morning, the windows feathered with frost, as if the world had left fingerprints detailing its dreams of flight. And out for a cigarette with your first coffee, 2 dogs, and evaporate rising in the backyard, like smoke from a bushfire up in the Pasqua Hills, among the trees, just north and east of the peat bog where your cousin Elmer works, and where he sets up trail cams to catch ghost-like images of the caribou whose tracks he's seen, where they come to calve in spring, the tangled undergrowth and the soft, wet land protection from the local wolf pack. And you were reading an article about 2 young female poets, one from Greenland and one from the Marshall Islands, lives destroyed by the melting ice and others by the steadily rising tides. Communities thousands of miles apart, but violence is like that. It works up close and at great distances, like spookily conjoined subatomic particles. For some reason, you think of a colleague at work, her saying, "I love Indigenous cultures, they're so beautiful." And you want to tell her to just keep it to herself, that you don't give a fuck, that the people don't need the week-to-go hunger of her appreciation and praise. Save it for your God, you want to say. You witnessed what she did with the old woman's teachings about sage. She and her small, like-minded gang ran to the nearest bush, threw down some tobacco, and stripped it bare, then sat in the shade of a pickup truck and gossiped. They huddled and clucked, while plucking leaves from thin branches. And you realize that image is an insult to chickens everywhere, but at least you've still got your sense of humor, even though you were feeling bitter this morning, like the taste on your fingers after lighting a smudge, even though you do nothing but sit down to play around with words, while the controlled spin of the world whisks all of us into a future devoid of human care and concern, or the lack thereof. Thank you. And I now have the pleasure of introducing Phoebe Wang. Phoebe is a first-generation Chinese-Canadian writer and educator living in Toronto. Her first collection of poetry, Admission Requirements, was nominated for the Trillium Book Award. Her second collection, Waking Occupations, is forthcoming in 2022, and I am very much looking forward to it. She has served as a mentor with Diaspora Dialogues and works at OCAD University as a writing and learning consultant for ELL students. Phoebe.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Randy, for the introduction, and thank you to Anita and Souvankham for, oh, am I live? Okay, for including me in this collection. I'm currently in Fredericton, so I've been here for about 2 months. So this poem, Self-Portrait with Internal Conflict, is about my mother, who is a watercolor painter. And when I was growing up, she would set up these still lifes on the dining room table, usually a bunch of flowers or baskets, you know, just like ordinary items. And her style was very illustrative and extremely precise. And I was always just completely in awe and the detail. They looked so real, and yet they were not real because they were just completely blemish free. And I almost, it seemed to me also to extend to her life. And that she's such a perfectionist, and that she also arranged our house beautifully. So what I'll do is I'm not able to share what her paintings now, but I'll put it in the link. She's got a very out-of-date website, but you can see some of her earlier work in it. And so Self-Portrait with Internal Conflict is a part of a longer series of ekphrastic poems I wrote about what it means to be a female artist and to arrange one's life so that it is conducive to the making of art. But it's a slightly ironic title because in my mom, I never really saw much sign of internal conflict. And the way I set up the poem was really to mimic kind of thought process, and I got very into Carl Phillips at the time I was writing this manuscript, and I love his meandering lines and the way he catches himself in kind of mid-thought and then reverses. So I wanted to have that that kind of feeling in this poem. And I was also very interested in the idea of a turn or a pivot that happens in a sonnet. So this poem isn't really a sonnet, but it does kind of have a turn where between the sections I ask these questions and then turns to a possible answer. So I'll read the poem now. Self-Portrait with an Internal Conflict. As if she were making an argument, not for beauty, but for yellow tulips supple with purpose, the patternless patina of a brass kettle, while the hand that arranged them is suggested in the gathering, the maturing, the waiting, the pause of dusky blueberries, apples turned towards delight or away from it, the source of which is unseen. And yet beauty persists because of what has been removed, so that each bundle of straw, each arrangement could become the essence of itself, without rot or browning or stains or the sticky bits of scraped off tape and insects. And that persistence endowed even the blank parts of the paper with a glow, a purity that seeped beyond her work to the other parts of the house, the white walls, the piles of fruit in their wooden bowls, the patchwork quilts on our single beds, until it was all I could see, along with her bent efforts. We admired them. They were convincing, almost preferable to the real thing, filling the blanks on the wall that were wanting. It's my very, very great pleasure to introduce M. Travis Lane, who is also in Fredericton. M. Travis Lane came to the U.S. to Fredericton with her husband, Laureate Jane Jr., and her infant daughter, Hannah, in 1960, and their son, Laureate III, was born here, and their family became Canadian citizens in 1973. I'd also want to mention that she's published 19 books of poetry and 2 of prose, and that her latest book, Keeping Count, is now available through Gordon Hill Press. So welcome, Travis.
Stick bend like water tight advice. But what am I? A stick tossed on the current. I can't bend, can't fight, can't mark my way. I've had my green leaves and my bloom. Now dry, I sense the pull of oceans I can't navigate. Nor can I choose one threaded flow. Among the rocks, mud's effluent. But like a stick a child has thrown into a river, I bob and turn, thrown and thrown away.
I'd like to introduce Manahil Bandukwala. She is a Pakistani writer and artist based in Mississauga, Ontario. She is currently completing her MA in English at the University of Waterloo. Her Reth or Rajasthan is a multidisciplinary literary and visual arts project that explores folklore from Pakistan. She is a member of Seven, an Ottawa-based writing collective. Welcome, Manahil.
Hello, my name is Manahil, and thank you so much to everyone for organizing this launch. I wrote my poem, This Is Not a Monsoon Poem, about 2 years ago during a trip to Karachi on a 24-hour train ride that got delayed into about a 38-hour journey because of monsoon rains. On one hand, the monsoon was welcome because of the intense summer heat, but on the other hand, the infrastructure in Karachi is not equipped to handle the severity of the rains, and there's a lot of devastation that comes along with that. So This Is Not a Monsoon Poem kind of responds to the portrayal and romanticization of monsoons in kind of Indian and Pakistani cinema and literature. This is not a monsoon poem. This is infrastructure crumbling. This is potholes flooded with water. Cars fall in ditches, struck, run over by other cars who don't see in this barsat. This is glass leaking. This is the scar on my foot, inch of skin, flesh, scooped off, a slip on marble. This is 1,000 dead, week of pelting rain collapsed a building. This is schools that no longer stand. Swarms of flies and dengue and not enough vaccines to go around. This is the monsoon, strikes each August. This is crumbling. And now I'm going to introduce the next reader, John Steffler, who I wrote an essay about and studied in my second year at university, so it's a bit surreal to kind of be coming around and introducing him. John Steffler lives in rural Eastern Ontario. He's published 7 books of poems, 2 novels, and a book of essays about poetry, language, and wilderness, which is 41 pages from University of Regina Press in 2019. His most recent collection of poems is And Yet from McClelland and Stewart in 2020. And from 2006 to 2009, he was Parliamentary Poet Laureate of Canada.
Thank you, Manahil, and thank you, Anita and Souvankham, for including me in this event. Thank you, Manahil. It's great to meet you here, virtually at least, and it's great to be part of this community of poets reading this evening. I really love the range and the connectedness amongst us all. And thank you, Souvankham, and thank you, Anita. I'm honored to be included in this event. When I wrote What Kind of Tracks Are These, I've been thinking about approaching writing as a kind of reading. A reading of experiences, memories, the surrounding world as an array of signs, the way I might try to read the tracks left by some unseen creature. This approach to writing would be more receptive than assertive, more a matter of listening and observing, less a matter of claiming territory with loud words. It would involve questioning and discovering what is real, rather than overlaying the world with wishful thinking or inventing alternative worlds. Following clues, piecing together causes and backstories helps us understand who we are, where things have come from, and where they might be heading. Don't questions invite surprise? And doesn't the downfall of an oppressive old custom or structure often start with a bold original question? What kind of tracks are these? This morning, is the interrogative the only working gear? Could we say it's similar to reverse because operating in why or how, we can't clearly see where we're going or gain much speed? And don't we find ourselves slowly reviewing a landscape we earlier passed through, taking it in only subliminally, if at all? And aren't we now seeing the backside of what we took for the front? Is it stupid to assume that the first glimpse we have of a thing is its front? Does looking back at the way you've come make you realize you're lost? Which European philosopher believed that asking questions delays or deflects the movement of time? Are you irritated by this? If you could swivel your head like an owl, would reverse be forward? Likewise, if we refuse to accumulate answers, can a barrage of questions offer vertical lift? Are questions inherently more comical than statements? While a question clearly leads to a gulf that anyone might fill, is it not true that statements use their bulk or authority or menace or brutality or beauty or their intimidating confidence or blurred complexity to conceal the empty gulf behind where they started? Do you assume there's someone inside you who could explain how you got where you are? Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, everybody. That Ian made me cry and Randy made me laugh, and the rest of you had me wrapped through your poems. So thank you so much for sharing them, for doing this online event, which is, not the same as us all getting together and reading our poems. And I hope against hope that we'll all be able to do this again soon, in person someday, all of us getting together with other poets and sharing our work. And so I want to thank everyone who came to hear the poets. We poets need readers and listeners to share our work with. So we thank you for your time, your attention, your openness, and your ears, and for taking in these words tonight. A huge thank you to the Ottawa International Writers Festival for hosting us this evening, to Sean Wilson and Kira Harris and the team there for their embrace of poetry with this event and so many others, to Mike Kay for his heroic behind-the-scenes efforts to connect us all, and a thousand thanks to Souvankham for taking on this adventure with me this year. This event is recorded and available at the festival website, maybe not immediately, but soon. And be sure to check out all the other events at the festival and to look for Best Canadian Poetry published by Billy Oasis and the other Best Canadian series. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night.